Okay, geweldig. Morgen, morgen. So yesterday we learned a follow-up to the Mishnah. I actually forgot to mention an important Tosfos on the Mishnah of Kashem Shamayim Boitken Isai, Kachamayim Boitken Isa. Tosfos quotes a Yerushalmi that quotes a Gematria. And he says, Binyan Hame'orim. So the two ratios is 400. 200 plus 200 is 400. There's two mems, so that's 480. And then you have 480, and then you have 10 is 490, and then you have Hey and Aleph, so 496. 496 is exactly 2 times Reish Mem Ches 248. 248 times 2 is 496. So it's neged Ramach Evarim Sheish Ba, the neged Ramach Evarim Sheyesh Ba. That is an interesting gematria that the Yerushalmi brings down. So yesterday we learned that the Shem Shabbat Shemayim Boitken Isa, Kachamayim Boitken Isa is referring to the boil and not to the Baal, and we learned it from Uvo. Then we had a little bit of a shaila if it was from the fact that it says bo twice or if it's because of the vav before. So we actually had a machlokes where only Rabbi Kiva held that you darshan the extra vav, and therefore according to Rabbi Kiva it might be the extra vav, but according to Revii it was from the fact that the word was mentioned twice. And the same thing came a little later when we had the tuva nitmos to darshan that Kishem Shasur Labal, Kach Asur Laboyel. We learned it as well from there. The Gemara ended up saying that there's 6 psukim that Rabbi Akiva darshans, and we learned that there's 3 inyanim that are needed to be expressed. It's the yediyah, which means telling us the right order. First the beten, then the yerech. The tzavah, that Hashem is telling the mayim to do what it has to do, and then there's the asiyah, the Torah relating actually that's going to happen. So these 3 components is mentioned once for the woman and one for the man. I'm sorry, one for the Baal. I'm sorry, one for the woman, one for the man. That's how the Gemara darshan according to Rabbi Kiva, and according to Revii. How do we know? It's because when it said the halach of Yediyah, instead of saying it b'loshen nekeva or b'loshen zocher, it says it in a neutral loshen, literally bottom v'lampel yarech, to tell us that the boil is also going to be nivdak with the mayim ha'ma'orim, and it also tells you the right order. It can tell you both. Okay, gewaltig. Then the Gemara quotes an interesting brayso. So the Gemara says as follows: the Gemara wants to dash in the 3 times that it says in the parsha in nitma, in loy nitma. The Gemara, the brayso asks, "Oh, I don't understand. What are the 3 nitmas?" So the Gemara says, "Echad l'bal, b'echad l'bayil, b'echad l'truma." One is to tell you that this woman, she's in the matzav of Isser. It's a suffix if she was Mizana or not. She may no longer eat Teruma. Even if she's a Bas Kohen, even if she's married to a Kohen, she may no longer eat Teruma. That's what Rabbi Kiva said. And Rabbi Shmuel responded with something completely different that the Gemara struggles to understand what he means. Rabbi Shmuel comments, why would I need a pasuk to tell me that she's Asur L'Kahuna? It's pasuk that she's Asur L'Kahuna. And we know that Rabbi Kiva didn't comment on whether or not she's muteres l'kahuna. So what is Rabbi Shmuel asking on Rabbi Kiva? The Gemara will end up telling us, which is where we're going to start today, is that clearly Rabbi Kiva also agrees that this woman, once she's a Sotah, even if her husband dies, it would be usher for her to go now and marry a kohen. She got a psul zoina. And the Gemara says that for sure that's what Rabbi Kiva holds. Where does he know it from? He must know it from a pasuk. And on that, for Rabbi Shmuel, why would you need a pasuk? We could have a kal v'chayim. Then the Gemara went off on a little tangent and told us that from Sotah, since this is the nitma or v'loy nitma, it teaches us that even though she's in a matzav of suffix, and we in fact don't know if she was novellas, we don't know the answer. Nevertheless, the Torah treats her as if she's vaday aser. Magid lachakosuf shasofak asura, and this now is the makor of sofak tamei rishus hayachid sveikai tamei. So therefore, asheretz, if it's a sofak, if it touched something, and this occurred in rishus hayachid, it's not a sofak tuma, it's a vaday tuma. The Gemara said that this halacha has rules to it. It only applies in rishus hayachid because that is where the parsha of Sotah is, and it doesn't mean Rishus Yochid or Rishus Rabbim, like the domains, the Gabichil Shabbos. It means when there's two people and no one else, that's called Rishus Yochid. If there's a third person there, that would be called Rishus Rabbim, where it's Sveikai Tahar. And we said that only applies if it's a Dover Sheyesh Boidas Lishoil. Because this halacha of Sveikai Tahar is learned from Sotah. By Sotah, there's two people, the man and the woman, who know exactly what happened. So too, the only time we say Sveikai Tamei by a Sofek Tuma is if there's a Yesh B'das L'Shol, if at least someone, there's a person involved somewhere in this Sofek that would have had the ability to have known if the Tuma touched the tire. That was the halacha that we did. Then the Gemara went back to this conversation between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva, where Rabbi Shmuel asked Rabbi Kiva, why do I need a pasuk to tell me that this woman is also the kahuna? I should know it from a kal v'chayim. So Zog the Gemara, Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva Teruma u'mahadr la'iyu kahuna. Rabbi Kiva just said that there's a pasuk to tell us that this woman cannot eat truma. So why is Rabbi Shmuel asking on Rabbi Kiva, why do I need a pasuk for kahuna? Where did Rabbi Kiva ever say that I need a pasuk for kahuna? Visu, additionally, Rabbi Kiva kahuna minole. Clearly, Rabbi Kiva agrees that this woman may not marry a kohen, but where does he know it from? If you're going to say that according to Rabbi Kiva, I don't need a pasuk, a special pasuk to tell me that she's also to marry a kohen, because by the mere fact that the Torah says she's a vadai zoina because of sveikai tamei, well, we know by definition that a zoina cannot marry a kohen. The Torah considers her, even though it's only a suffix if she was mezana. The Torah gives her a status of vadai tamei. Well, for that reason, Teruma nami lo tibayikra. We know that Rabbi Kiva used v'nitma to tell us that she may not eat Teruma. Why would I need a pasuk? Once she's classified as a zoina, clearly she shouldn't be able to eat Teruma. So if that's the case, why does Rabbi Kiva need a pasuk? Now, where do we know that a zoina may not eat Teruma? So Rashi says, "Ubetruma hayadinan de zoina asur." By Teruma, we know a zoina is prohibited from eating Teruma. Where do we see this? Ichsiv kisiya leish zar, and we darshan kisi boil lezar etzla. If she becomes novellas for somebody who she's not allowed to be novellas to, the pasuk says, "He besrumas Kodshim leisoichel." She's no longer allowed to eat Teruma. The ein lach pasul gadol mizeh. There's no greater example of a woman who's novellas to pasala than a married woman who's married and then has nus with another man. Hello, Rabbi Kiva arbal kroi ksiva. So according to Rabbi Kiva, there's 4 psukim: chad lebal, chad leboil, the chad lekuna, the chad letruma. We'll say that Rabbi Kiva says no. The fact that she's a zoina is only the gabitoma, and it doesn't tell us that she should be aser kahuna, and it doesn't tell us that she should be aser for truma. But he uses the psukim. What are the 4 psukim? Zogt Rashi, arba kroyeseri beis nitma. Twice it says nitma, and then once it says vin nitma. And Vin Nitma counts as 2 because of the Vav. Rabbi Kiva Darish Vave Hare Arba. Let's look at these psukim inside, just that we're not just counting numbers, we actually see psukim and where it's extra, where it's not. So I'm going to go back to Parshas Nosoi again, and the Mishnah says, the pasuk says, "V'hishka samayim v'haya im nitma," is number 1, and then it says, "V'im loy nitma," that's number 2. Then it says, "Zois teres hakanois asher sister isha tachas isha v'nitma," which counts as 2 for a sum total of 4 limudim, and therefore Rabbi Akiva applies the 4 limudim as follows: chad lebal, chad leboil, the chad letruma, and chad lekuna. That's how. Thank you so much, Marty. That's how. I wasn't so bad today. Today I got it early enough that I was able to put the water up to cook, so at least it was hot. I'm getting somewhere, making improvement. Okay, so that's where we're up to now. We're 5 lines from the top of the Chav Tes Amud Aleph, Rabbi Shmuel, which is where we left off yesterday. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol niyeh b'dvarim. Olam hazeh geschmack. Okay, Rabbi Shmuel, Plosa Kroi, Ksivi. Rabbi Shmuel doesn't hold up the limud from the extra vav as Rabbi Kiva does. So he has 3 psukim to use. Chad lebal, v'chad leboil, v'chad l'truma. One tells us that this woman may not eat truma. Uchahuna also b'kal v'chomer. And kahuna, that she's also to marry a kohen, I know that from a kal v'chomer. And that's why Rabbi Shmuel asked, why do you need a pasuk to tell you that she's also l'kahuna? Why don't you learn it from a kal v'chomer? Correct the Gemara, you have 1 extra pasuk. Besides the Baal and Boil, you have 1 extra pasuk. Logic would dictate that you should apply it to the lesser chiddush of the 2. So what's a lesser chiddush? What is a lesser chiddush? That she's usher in truma, or that she may not marry a kohen? Clearly, Rabbi Shmuel made a kal v'chomer. Madich, she's usher for truma. Surely she can't marry a kohen. So to Rabbi Shmuel, it's more logical that she shouldn't be able to marry a kohen. Well, if I only have 1 pasuk, I should apply it to truma and to make a kal v'chomer. Maybe apply the pasuk to kahuna and mehechadeshi according to Rabbi Shmuel that she's prohibited from eating truma. Rabbi Shmuel mimayd itzrich kral the truma. How do you know that the pasuk is referring to truma and then you can make a kal v'chomer? Madach she's also in truma. Kolshkein and kahuna. Kahuna also kal v'chomer. Maybe it's punk v'ker. Dilma ki itzrich lekahuna. Maybe if you only have 1 pasuk, let's look at the lesser chiddush. It's a lesser chiddush to prohibit this woman from marrying a kohen. Utruma sharia, maybe truma will be mutter and ganzen. According to Rabbi Shmuel's logic, if he only has 1 extra pasuk, it should be applied to ask her from marrying a kohen and not to ask her from eating truma. Amar lach, Rabbi Shmuel has a comeback. Mistabra dumya debal uboil. We have nitma, v'nitma. From the 2 first limudim, is one's answering her to the Baal, one's answering her to the Boil. So let's think. Ma Baal uboil machayim. That we say she's a sur lebal, also to the Boil, that means even though nobody died, even if nobody died, she's usher to the Baal, and if the Baal divorces this woman, she remains usher to the Boil as well. So all of these asurim will be active and relevant while the husband is still alive. So therefore, Zok Rabbi Shmuel, if we're going to learn from the 3rd word, v'nitma, another limud, it should be similar to the set that we're darshaning. We're darshaning a set of 3 nitmas. Av truma nami mechayim. Let's say truma is only coming to prohibit her something that would be relevant when her husband was alive. So let's think. When her husband's alive, if her husband's alive and he divorces her, what else is she usher to? Even in her husband's lifetime, she's usher to truma. But if you're telling me the pasuk is asking her from kahuna, let's think about it. She wouldn't be mutter l'kahuna anyway in her husband's lifetime, because if her husband divorced her, she's a grusha. So where would it be relevant that she might be able to marry a kohen that we needed her to tell us he cannot? That's only if her husband dies and she becomes an almana, because an almana would be able to marry a kohen. So therefore, we'd rather apply the 3rd nitma to an issur that we could say exists even while her husband is still alive. Therefore, lafuke kahuna de la achar misa. The Isra of Kahuna, the Isra that prohibits her from marrying a Kohen is only relevant after her husband died. Because if her husband was Megarisher, anyway she would be Asher L'Kahuna. So that's why Rabbi Shmuel says we want to stick to the same type of limudim. Exactly, and then we can use a Kal V'chomer, Madach, she's Asher to eat Teruma, surely she's Asher to marry a Kohen. What about Rabbi Akiva? Why does he need an extra pasuk to teach us that? Dumya debalu boil, Lesla, he doesn't only have to keep it equal in the set. The first two limudim, if it wasn't for the extra vav, the first two limudim would be bal and boil, which are taka relevant machayim, and the third limud could have been for kahuna, and it's not a matching set. Big deal. And binami isli, and even if Rabbi Akiva would hold that the logic would dictate that the pasuk, if there was only one pasuk, it should be referring to Teruma. We still can have a pasuk to tell us that she's Asher L'Kahuna, even though I can note with the Kal V'chomer, because Rabbi Akiva holds Milsa the Asher B'Kal V'chomer Torach B'Kosav L'Kra. Excuse me. Sometimes the Torah will write Meferish or have a Revii, a Limud, a Yitor to teach us something that we could have otherwise figured out, even with a Kal V'chomer. Beautiful. So now everybody agrees, both Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel, that she's a Sur Labal, she's a Sur Laboil, she's Asur to eat Teruma, and she's Asur to marry a Kohen. The question really is where we know each of these halachas from. Amar Rav Gidol Merav. The next daf that we're going to learn today is complicated. We're going to be learning now a shtickle, a complicated daf, but after that it opens up and it gets easy. So today is Thursday, right? Okay, usually Wednesday is hump day. So this year Thursday will be hump day. We'll go through Thursday and then it'll be Kishmak and Gishmer. Amar Rav Gidol Merav. Davar sheyesh boy das l'shoyel, ve'ein boy das l'shoyel, mehaikra nafka. You taught us yesterday that how do we know the distinction between the davar sheyesh boy das l'shoyel, which we say sabek tumah b'shusayachot tzveikar tamei, and davar she'ein boy das l'shoyel, where we say even tzveikar tamei, even sabek b'shusayachid, if it's ein boy das l'shoyel, it will still be tar. And where do we know it from? From the comparison to Sotah. Where do we know Sotah Tamei b'shus yachad tzveikar tamei from Sotah? And by Sotah, it was a davar sheyesh b'das l'shoyel. You were dealing with humans. Are you telling me the makar of this distinction is Sotah? I'll show you psukim that already teach us that distinction. Because the pasuk says, let's look at the pasuk inside. It's Kishmaker. It says, "Va'basar asher yiga b'chol tamei." If basar touches anything that's tamei, lo yeyachel, it should not be eaten. Ba'ishi sorry. So speaking about Kodshim. Basar meat kol tor yochel basar. If you notice, if there's a very big distinction in this pasuk. The first half of the pasuk, when it's talking about basar shika b'chol tamei lo yochel, speaking about if meat became tamei, you're not allowed to eat the meat. The second half of the pasuk is basar kol tor yochel basar. What type of a human is allowed to eat basar? A human that's tar, right? So the first half of the pasuk is speaking about the meat being tamei or tar. And the second half of the pasuk is speaking about the human being tamei or tar when he's eating the meat. So Zok to Gemara, fascinating little pasuk over here. The basar ashayiga b'chol tamei lo yeyachel. So we learn that when the Torah says b'chol tamei, it means vadai tamei. Vadai tamei hu the lo yeyachel. Hasavik tamei v'savik tar yeyachel. You see from here that the Torah tells you that suffix is not a problem. It's only vadai. When the Torah says tamei, it means vadai tamei. It doesn't mean suffix tamei. Ema Sefer. Let's look at the second half of the pasuk. Va'basar kol tahar yochel basar. Someone who's vadai tahar is allowed to eat basar. Vadai tahar who the yochel basar hasafik tamei v'safik tahar lo yochel basar. It's a stira. The ratio of the pasuk is mashma that suffix tamei is not a problem, and the sefer is mashma that you need to be vadai tahar. So therefore, Sotah Tamei would be a problem. Ella, Lav Shemamina, this is how we must decipher the pasuk. In the second half of the pasuk, we mentioned that it's speaking about a human. By a human, it has to be vadai tahar, because if it's a suffix tuma, it's going to be vadai tuma. Kanchi yesh b'das l'shoyel. By a human who's a das l'shoyel, if a suffix tuma is noilad by a human, by someone who's yesh b'das l'shoyel, by him, unless you know b'vadai that it's tar, Kol Torah yochel basar, unless it's vaday tahar, we say misafik that it's also. But kan in the Reisha, where it's only speaking about an inanimate object becoming tummy like the meat, kan sheyesh boy, kan she'ein boy das l'shol. You can't ask the meat if it became tummy, and therefore we have the rule that sveikai tahar, and therefore kol tummy is also, but if it's not vaday tummy, it's going to be mutter. Interesting drasha. This seems like a little benign little drasha, but this storms the world. Because let me ask you a shayla. Here's a halacha, sofik d'oraisa l'chumra, sofik d'rabban l'kula. So this that there's halacha sofik d'oraisa l'chumra, is that mid'oraisa or mid'rabbanan? Is it just a chumra d'rabbanan that if you have a sofik in an isur d'oraisa, you go l'chumra, or no mid'oraisa sofik isur is also. So the Rambam holds that we say something isur l'chumra is only a chumra d'rabbanan. Why? I don't know where you would know it from. Right. So could be there's rise. You have to look at the sugya. But the Rambam for sure holds it's only with d'rabbanan. There's no such thing as suffix isur being also with d'oraisa. And one of the rise is from this pasuk here, because from this pasuk you see that when the Torah says something, it's referring to a vadai, which means va'abasar kol Torah yochel basar. You have to be vadai. When it says kol Torah, the Torah means vadai. When it says tamei, it means vadai. When the Torah says something, it means when it's vadai, not when it's suffix. So you see the Torah works with vadai. The Torah is not referring to sveikas. So that's a support for the Rambam that suffix isura d'oraisa mid'oraisa would be 100% l'kula. Only a chumra d'rabbanan. But on the flip side, you see from this pasuk that if the Torah was telling you, if the Torah only refers to vadai, so then you're right. When it's shaylav and isur and it's a suffix, you wouldn't say suffix d'oraisa l'chumra. But what if you have to be mekayim and a say? It's a suffix if the lulav you're using is a kosher lulav. Then you're not mekayim it. Because he says, when the Torah says do a mitzvah, the asay also has to be vadai. Just like the loisa says vadai, it works on the flip side as well. So when you do a mitzvah, it has to be a vadai as well. In fact, that's what the Rambam holds. Anyway, so now we have two separate sources that there's a distinction between a davar sheyesh b'das l'shoyel, where you say sveikai tamei b'rishus hayachid, and a davar she'ein b'das l'shoyel, where even b'rishus hayachid you say sveikai tar. We know it from Sotah, we know it from these plukim. Why do we need two limudim for the same halacha? The itzrich Rav Gidel Amarav, we need Rav Gidel's mekar from Basar. The itzrich lemigmar mi Sotah, yet we also need to learn this distinction from Sotah. The ibid Rav, if you only had the psukim by Basar, Havamina would have argued bein b'shus hayachid u bein b'shus harabim. The psukim by Basar don't make any distinction as to where this is located. We know that this is only a shaila in Rishus HaYachid. Rishus HaRabim anyway, you say Sveikai Tahar. Only in Rishus HaYachid do you need it to be a davar sheyesh b'das l'shoyel in order to say Sveikai Tahar. That's why it's Migmar Misaita. One of the main sources that we know from Sotah is that it's referring to Rishus HaYachid. V'misaita, so if we only had Sotah, Havamina adi iko das nogeya umagia. Das from Sotah, what does yesh b'das l'shoyel mean? Both parties have to be a yesh b'das l'shoyel in order to make a tummy, because there's two humans involved in the sofik by a Sotah. But if it's just a child, if I touched the sheretz, if I didn't touch the sheretz, well, there's not enough idea, because even though I know, the sheretz doesn't know. So maybe that would also be considered davar she'ein b'das l'shoyel shricha, that even if one of the parties is a yesh b'das l'shoyel, it qualifies as such, and therefore you'll say sofik tamei b'shus hayachid sveikai tamei if even one of the parties are yesh b'das l'shoyel. Gebaldik. Now we're going to get into the more complex Gemara. One of the ways you can tell that it's complex is because on Amud Beis there's no Toshis, it's all Rashi. Okay, let's see the Heilige Gemara. Let's go through it. Zok the Heilige Gemara. I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. Zok the Heilige Gemara. Boy bayoim darish Rabbi Akiva v'chol l'cheres. So we have a new halacha that was taught that day, and that is that up until that day, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had a limud, had a takal v'chomer, that tells us that by Teruma at least, Hasheni Yosy Shlishi, and by Kodshim Shlishi Yosy Revii, and he was afraid that nobody would remember his Kal V'chomer, no one would remember his Raya. Came along Rabbi Akiva, and he darshened from a pasuk that midairaisa even b'gai chulin asheni oisa shlishi, right? Because it says v'chol klicheres asher yovel al toichai yitma, right? Yitma means not only will it become tamei, it will be able to be matama something else. So we learned that the sheretz is an avatoma. It's suspended in the walls of a keli, making the keli into a rishon l'tuma. The rishon l'tuma makes some other object in the keli into a sheni l'tuma. And it says yitma, that thing that became tama in the keli can now go ahead and be matama something else, meaning it can make the next level into a shlishi. So you have a makar midaraisa that there's something called shlishi l'tuma even by chulin. Zok to Gemara, umay da ein loy. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, I don't have this drasha. So if you don't have this drasha, lo matame, why did Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai say that there's such a thing as shlishi l'tuma? Rabbi Yehuda Amarav, min ha-Torah ein loy. It's not mefurish in the pasuk, like Rabbi Akiva illustrated it, but rather midin kal v'chomer yesh loy. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was done a kal v'chomer, which tells us that there's something called Shlishi l'tuma l'gabe Teruma, and on Amud Beis we're going to also see that using another kal v'chomer, there's even a Revii l'tuma l'gabe Kodshim. And here's the kal v'chomer. Umat full yoim. So what is a tzful yoim? A tzful yoim is someone who was tamei. Maybe he was an avatuma. Maybe he touched the sheret. Maybe he touched the mace, and he went through the full entire process. And the final process, the final step is he goes to the mikveh, and he remains tamei until the end of the day, until evening. So we're talking about someone who has already done everything that he needs to do. Now all he needs to do is wait until nightfall. So matful yoim. He's waiting for nightfall. Shemutta b'chulin. He's mutta b'chulin, and when the Gemara says mutta b'chulin means he's allowed to eat, touch, and deal with ma'aser sheni. He's allowed to deal with ma'aser sheni. He doesn't passel ma'aser sheni. Nevertheless, paisel b'truma. If a tzful yoim touches truma, he makes it tamei. We're going to soon see it's a little bit of a shaila what status the tzful yoim has, but we're going to assume that the tzful yoim has a status of a sheni l'tuma. So if the tzful yoim was a sheni l'tuma, if he touches truma, he is going to make the truma pasul. Now, when we're talking about tuma and tahira, and we use the word tamei, and we use the word pasul, they have two different meanings. Tamei means not only is this tamei, but it also can make another thing tamei. Pasul means it itself is pasul, but it's at the end of the line. For instance, a sheni l'tuma is called tamei. You know why? Because it could now be matama truma and make it into a shlishi. But a shlishi l'tuma by truma is called pasul, because although it's pasul, you can't eat a truma. It can no longer infect anything else. It's at the end of the line. Same thing for Revii by Kodesh. A Revii by Kodesh is called pasul, but it's not called tamei because it cannot be matama anything else. But a shlishi l'tuma by Kodesh is called tamei because not only is itself tamei, it can also impact something else. Make sense? So Zok to Gemara. Zok to Gemara as follows: Umat full yoim, madachat full yoim, who we're going to say has the status of a sheni l'tuma. To muta b'chulin, he's allowed to be oisik in ma'aser sheni. He will not ruin the ma'aser sheni. Yet paisel b'truma, he's going to make the truma into a shlishi l'tuma and pasul the truma. Kikar sheni. If I had a kikar that was sheni l'tuma, rather than this human that's full yoim, I actually had a kikar that was a sheni l'tuma. Shepasul b'chulin, which if a kikar sheni is ma'aser sheni that has the tuma, the level of a sheni, that ma'aser sheni is pasul. So kikar sheni shepasul b'chulin ein oidin sheyasa shlishi b'truma. Surely it should even be able to make a shlishi b'truma. So let's analyze this kal v'chomer for a second. Usually, when you make a kal v'chomer, we say that whatever place we're learning from, the chumrah that we've seen by the place that we're learning from should apply to the place that we're trying to learn to. So what halacha are we trying to learn? That sheni could make a shlishi. So where are we learning that from? What's the source of it? The source of it is Tful Yoim. Madach Tful Yoim, who could be Isaac and Ma'aser Sheni, Pasels Teruma, meaning if a Tful Yoim is a Sheni, the Tful Yoim, if he touches the Teruma, will Pasel the Teruma to a Kiker Sheni, a Kiker that's a Sheni, that if it was Ma'aser Sheni, it would be possible. Ein Oidin to Yasha Shlishi B'Truma, it should surely be able to make a Shlishi. He passes the Ma'aser Sheni, right? Right. No, if the Ma'aser Sheni, no, it's pasul. If the kicker was, if you had a kicker of Ma'aser Sheni that was a Sheni L'Tumah, it would be pasul, because it itself is tummy. That's correct. That's correct. Because if a Tful Yoim could pasul Truma, surely. So if a Tful Yoim could pasul Truma and it can't pasul Ma'aser Sheni, surely a Kiker Sheni should pasul Truma. So I think this is the kasha that you're asking. So let's look at Rashi, a very important Rashi. Kiker Sheni should pasul b'chulin. Where do you know Kiker Sheni is pasul b'chulin? Yosiv kol asher b'soicha yitma. Anything that's in this klicheres, and the klicheres is a rishon, right? The klicheres is a rishon. Anything that's in this klicheres is going to become tamei. It doesn't make a difference if it's chulin, if it's truma, or if it's kodshim b'mashma. So you see here that when a piece of ma'aser sheni becomes a sheni l'tumah, it's possible. So din hu, therefore, it's a svar to say sheyasha shlishi b'truma, the sheni should be able to make a shlishi b'truma. So you might ask, I think this is what you're asking. You're asking Dayai, where do you see anything is making a shlishi? Where do you see anything is making a shlishi? All you see is that if it's Tful Yoim touches truma, it passes the truma. But where do you see that it could make it into a shlishi? This is a new tumah we want to devise out of this kavachomer that it can make a shlishi. So zokt Rashi v'dayai lekal meimer. You can't say dayai lovim and the dinlayis kanida, and you don't find anywhere that Tful Yoim can make a shlishi. So how could you learn that a sheni could make a shlishi? Because then we don't have a kavachomer, and there's nothing to learn. The sheni b'truma mikra mishtama kichulim. We know minatayra that truma could become tuma sheni. The kaimalon, and we have a rule, the heichad of mirfach kavachomer lo yamrin dayai. So here we definitely have a chumrah that Tful Yoim has over a kiker sheni, or because you see that the Tful Yoim will pasel truma. So if the Tful Yoim will pasel truma, surely the kiker sheni should pasel truma. The only way the kiker sheni will pasel truma is if it makes it into a shlishi. Even though a Tful Yoim can't make it into a shlishi, or you don't know yet necessarily that a Tful Yoim can make it into a shlishi, so we're learning a greater halacha to the sheni l'tumah. The sheni l'tumah we're learning could do even more than the Tful Yoim, and the Tful Yoim is the makar. Normally by kavachomer you could only learn as much as the makar. You can't learn more than the makar. So for that there's a rule that when do you say you cannot learn more than the makar by kavachomer? That's if there's something else to learn. But if there's nothing else to learn from the kavachomer, you can in fact extract from a kavachomer the madach Tful Yoim could pasel truma, kol sheged a sheni could make a shlishi b'truma. Even though that's a greater chiddush than what you see by Tful Yoim itself. Okay, so zok to Gemara ikal mifrach. We have this kavachomer has a weakness in it. Ikal mifrach can ask Akak, you can't bring me right from a Tful Yoim. Mal Tful Yoim shekin avatuma. You know why a Tful Yoim pasels truma if he touches it? The reason why a Tful Yoim pasels truma if he touches it is because the Tful Yoim was once upon a time an avatuma. He might have touched a mace, right? He might have touched a mace, and now he's coming off as tumas mace, and he's at the final step. So since the source of the tumah was an ab, that's why it's able to passel truma. But a sheni l'tuma was never an avatuma. It was merely a sheni l'tuma. That a sheni l'tuma would have that koyach to passel the truth. Zok the Gemara, Teisei mitful yoim the sheretz. Not every tful yoim started off as an avatuma. If he touched a mace, yes, he would have started off as an avatuma. But what if someone touched the sheretz? If someone touched the sheretz, where the sheretz itself is the avatuma, then the person who touched the sheretz is only a rishon l'tuma. So, well, I could make the siluk al Ma tful yoim who only touched the sheretz, who was never an avatuma. At most, he was a rishon l'tuma. Nevertheless, if he touches Ma'aser Sheni, the Ma'aser Sheni is perfectly fine. Yet, if this tful yoim touches Truma, he passes the Truma. A Sheni l'tuma, which in itself is possible for Ma'aser Sheni, Kol Shekain, it should be able to make a Shlishi l'tuma. Zok the Gemara, Malat tful yoim d'sheret shekain b'minoi avatuma. You still can't bring me a right from tful yoim, because tful yoim has in it, it could have come from an avatuma. So a tful yoim is inherently more chomerdik because a tful yoim could have been sourced from an avatuma. So you can't bring me a raya that just because tful yoim is able to passel truma, just because a tful yoim could passel truma, it's chomer. You can't bring me a raya that a sheni l'tuma should also be able to passel truma. Zok to Gemara, kli cheres shechiach. Let me bring a raya from a kli cheres. A kli cheres she'ein b'minei avatuma. A kli cheres can never become an avatuma. A kli cheres at most can ever become a rishon l'tuma, and nevertheless, umitama es a truma to shi rishon, the kli cheres will be able to make truma that's in it. It'll passel it. The rishon, the kli cheres, which is a rishon, will passel the truma. So kli cheres shechiach, as Rashi explains, she'ein b'minoi avatuma, a kli cheres could never be an avatuma. Nevertheless, umetame es a truma keshur rishon. It makes the truma possible when the keli is a rishon. V'chol shekain shepoisla. Surely it's possible that truma. Af ata al tatama al kikar sheni. Therefore, it's logical to say that a kikar sheni, shaf al pi she'ein b'minoi avatuma, even though a kikar sheni could never be an avatuma, nevertheless, yiv soil, it will be able to passel truma, making it into a shlishi. The time allowed ba'avatumah. You see that the reason why tful yoim was able to can't because it's an avatuma, because it could have been an avatuma, because you find other things that could passel truma, rishon making them into a sheni, which never could have ever been an avatuma, like a kli cheres. So zokma kli cheres shechiach. Zokma, that's not either a good raya. Kli cheres also has a chumrah that you don't see by a kikar sheni. Malik kli cheres shekei mitama me'aviroi. Kli cheres has a special chumrah. It's unique from any other type of tumah, that it's matama from the inside, from its airspace. Maybe that special chumrah gives it the right to passel the truma. But who said that a sheni l'tumah could passel truma? Dr. Gemara, tful yoim tells you the reason why the kli cheres is matama the truma, making it into a sheni, is not because of its special quality that it's matama me'aviroi, because it's tful yoim doesn't have that mila. Like every tara shabbos shaben, the reason why tful yoim is metame, the sheni makes the truma possible, cannot be because of its mila that it could have had an avatuma, because you see a kli cheres never could have been an avatuma. And you can't say the mila of the kli cheres, why it's able to passel the truma with a sheni, is because of the mila, the chumrah, that it's metame mitoichoi, because tful yoim doesn't. Hatzara shava shabehen. So what similarity do they share? Shemutar and bechulin. If you had ma'aser sheni that fell into this kli cheres, it would be mutar, and if a tful yoim touched the ma'aser sheni, it would be mutar. Nevertheless, with poisel b'truma, if truma fell into this kli cheres, or if a tful yoim touches this truma, it passes the truma, and therefore we can say kol sheken kikar sheni shepoisel b'chulin. Kikar sheni, which would be possible if it was ma'aser sheni, the poisel b'truma, it'll make a shlishi b'truma. And that was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's kal v'chomer that he made to prove that there's such a thing as shlishi l'tuma by Teruma, and he was concerned that people will eventually do away with his Kal V'chomer. So that's why it was so exciting to him that Rabbi Kiva found the drasha Mineu Bei from the Pasuk. As an aside, the Kotzker Rebbe says, why is it that a klicheres is betama mitoich? So he says a very interesting thought. Every other keli, gold, silver, metal, the keli itself has intrinsic value. So therefore, the outside is tamei. A klicheres is worthless. It's made out of shards. It's made out of cheres, earth. Its only value is because it's a container, because of the function that it services. So that's its only value. Therefore, it's only matama by what its value is. It's just an interesting thought. Zokta Gemara, V'dar Achar, Yochanan ben Zakkai was worried that some future generation will reject his Kal V'chomer. Why would they reject this Kal V'chomer? It's a rock solid Kal V'chomer. Dr. Gemara, because V'dar Achar he was afraid would ask the following pircha on his Kal V'chomer. Porach, Ma la tzad hashava shebehen, this tzad hashava, meaning the Tful Yoim and the Klicheres that are the source of where we learn that a Sheni could make a Shlishi, Shekain Yesh Bahem Tzad Chomer. They each have a Tzad Chomer. Now, this pircha, in fact, if you made such a pircha, in fact, it totally eliminates every Tzad HaShava. Because every Tzad HaShava, there's a Tzad Chomer, right? And the whole point is, since this Tzad Chomer is different than that Tzad Chomer, since the Tzad Chomer by A is not the same as the Tzad Chomer by B, it proves that that can't be the reason for it. And the Tzad HaShava Sheben is enough to make the limud. But he was afraid that some door in the future will say that Tzad Chomer is a good pircha, and therefore it eliminates the full idea of ever making a matzah, and therefore he was happy, he was worried that people would reject his limud. What about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai who made this matzah? Tzad Chomer leporach. He holds you can ask a kasha from two things in a matzah that each one has its own chumrah, but not the same chumrah. That's not a pircha on the matzah. Okay, gewaltig. So now we have it down pat. We have it clear. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had a Kal V'chomer that would prove that a sheni can be Osher Shlishi by Teruma, and the Kal V'chomer is, or the matzah is, you see a klicheres will passel Teruma if it falls into it. The klicheres that's a rishon will passel Teruma if it falls into it. We know a Tfil Yoim who touches Teruma will passel the Teruma, even though they don't passel none of these two things, passel Ma'aser Sheni. Yet, if you had Ma'aser Sheni that was a Sheni L'Tuma, it would be passel. So surely that Sheni L'Tuma should also be able to passel Teruma by making it into a Shlishi. That was the limud that we had. Tanya Rabbi Yosy. We've just discussed how Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai knew that Shlishi B'Teruma is passel. How do you know Minayin li Revii b'Kodesh passel? Where does Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai know that the Revii b'Kodesh is passel? Zok to Gemara, we also have a Kal V'chomer. V'dinu, ma mechusar kippurim. A mechusar kippurim is someone who already had Herav Shemesh. All he needs now is tomorrow morning he has to bring karbanos before he could be Isaac and eat Kodshim. So a mechusar kippurim is relevant by many type of tumas, like by a zob, like a mitzayra, right? We learned that once they finish all of their process, the next morning they have to bring the carbon. So ma mechusar kippurim shemuta b'truma. A mechusar kippurim is allowed to eat truma. Once the evening comes, the night before he's going to bring his karbanis, he is allowed to eat truma. Nevertheless, Paisel b'kodesh. If a person who did not bring yet his karbanis touches Kodshim, he's going to passel. He's going to passel the Kodshim. So Shlishi, shepassel b'truma. Shlishi, that's passel b'truma, einoi dinhu sheyase Revii b'kodesh. Madich and mechusar kippurim. So this is exactly the same type of Kal V'chomer, but we're using it for the next step. Madich and mechusar kippurim, who if he eats truma, he's allowed to eat truma without any problem. Yet he'll passel Kodshim, Shlishi l'tuma, which passels truma, surely it should be able to make a Revii b'kodesh. V'lamadnu Shlishi l'kodesh min haTorah. Shlishi l'kodesh, we know min haTorah, uRevii mikal v'chomer. Now, Shlishi b'kodesh, Rashi is going to tell us, we can use the same kal v'chomer that taught us that you have Shlishi b'truma, you can use to tell you that you have Shlishi b'kodesh as well. It's the same kal v'chomer. Fakert kodesh is even more stringent. Yet, there's actually a pasuk, according to this, there's actually a pasuk that tells us that Shlishi b'kodesh is also. Shlishi b'kodesh from the Torah minolam, the chsiv it says, v'habasar asher yiga b'chol tamei, a basar of Kodshim that touches any type of tumah. Any type of tumah. We know for sure before any psukim, any type of tumah includes a sheni l'tumah, because a sheni l'tumah is a regular tumah that we know applies across the board. So if you have a basar of Kodshim that touches anything that's tumah at all, lo yeyachel, that basar Kodshim becomes nifselas and you can no longer eat it. What type of tumah did this basar touch? Milo yaskin the naga b'sheni. We must be referring to even if the basar touched the sheni, meaning it became a shlishi. So you see a pasuk that tells us that shlishi b'kodesh is pasul, and Revii is mekal v'chomer kidamaron, and the Revii is from the kal v'chomer that we just said. Madich a b'chutz kapurim. Who could touch truma and he won't cause a problem with it. Nevertheless, if he touches Kodshim will pasul it. Shlishi with pasul truma surely should make a Revii b'kodesh. Gewaltig. Rabbi Yochanan tan b'ribi eini yodeh hamahu. Rabbi Yosy, who just made this kal v'chomer to tell us that Revii b'kodesh is possible, I don't think he made a good kal v'chomer. I think his kal v'chomer can be shlugged up. You know why? Dr. Gemara, sharei tshuvasei b'tzidoi. The upslug to the kal v'chomer is literally built in till the kal v'chomer itself. Why? Because there's something called oichel haba machmas tvul yoim. What is an oichel haba machmas tvul yoim? This is the subject of a big machloikis. What is the status of an oichel haba machmas tvul yoim? So let's see Rashi. What is an oichel haba machmas tvul yoim? Shenaga b'tvul yoim. You have a food item that touched a tvul yoim. V'hu shel kodesh, oy shel truma. So you have a tvul yoim. Remember, we said we're sort of giving him the status of a sheni, and you have oichel that touched this tvul yoim, meaning it's either kodesh or truma. So what is its status? The halacha is shepasul b'truma min haTorah. Midaraisa, if a tvul yoim touches a piece of truma, it passes the truma. Because the precious leil, the Gemara earlier takes that on as a pashtus, right? The Gemara said earlier, tvul yoim that touches truma will passel it. The bechelim nami ksiv harav shemesh lagabe truma ve'ena el negia. So we do know as a fact that a tvul yoim that touches truma will passel it. Yet the ene oisa Revii b'kodesh l'rabanon the pligi alei the abishol. So there's actually a machloikis. There's a three-way machloikis. What is the status of oichel that was touched by its tvul yoim? So before we actually focus on the kasha, let's understand and let's go through the three-way machloikis that exists by such a case. So I'm going to skip a couple of lines, which we'll get back to understand the kal v'chomer. But first, let's understand what this halacha is of oichel haba machmas tvul yoim. The Tanya we learned, Abba Shol Omer, tvul yoim is tchila l'kodesh. A tvul yoim does not have a status of a sheni, which I've been assuming up until now. Rather, Abba Shol learns that a tvul yoim has a status of a rishon. So if a tvul yoim has a status of a rishon, then if he touches a food item, he'll make that food item into a sheni. That sheni can then turn around. If we're talking about Kodshim at least, it could then turn around and make something that it touches into a shlishi, right? And that shlishi can then turn around and make another piece of Kodshim into Revii, to passel it. So zokt abashol, tvul yoim, techilasi l'kodesh. It's a rishon. Therefore, l'tamei shnayim, it could make the first thing it touches into a sheni, which can actually be metame something else, and that something else will become a shlishi, which could also be metame something else. It can make a Revii. The lift lechod, and it can also make a Revii, which we refer to as pasul, because that's the end of the line. So that's Abba Shol Shita. Reb Meir Shita is mitama echad u'poisel echad. Reb Meir holds like us that a tvul yoim is a sheni l'tumah. So therefore, it could make a shlishi l'tumah. The shlishi l'tumah is called tomei because it can go on and make a Revii u'poisel echad. So Reb Meir holds that the Tful Yoim has the status of a Sheni, therefore it could be Matama 1, and then the next one will be Revii, which will be possible. The third Shita in this halacha is Keshem Shepaisel Oichle Truma Umashke Truma, just like a Tful Yoim will passel Truma, the food of Truma, the Mashkin of Truma, Kach Paisel Oichle Kodesh Umashke Kodesh, he is the most makel. Okay, so we have this machlokes. It's already past the time. We'll stop here and we'll get to the pircha that Rabbi Yochanan Revii had on the Kodshim of Rabbi Yosy. We'll get to tomorrow based on this machlokes, this three-way machlokes of what is the status of a tful yoim who touches food. Okay, we'll stop here. We'll be finished. We'll be tomorrow.